Hey everyone, this is Rick Gualtieri, and this is another Tales of a Midlist Author. What I wanted to do was kind of a companion piece. A couple weeks ago, I was talking about choosing a cover artist and working with them, and I figured I'd be remiss if I didn't talk about the other side of that puzzle, which is choosing and working with an editor or editors, as it may be. Once again, we've talked about it before, the holy trinity of selling your book. Make sure it's well edited, make sure it has a great cover, make sure it has a killer blurb. So with that in mind, first we should talk about what editing means, because not all editing is created equal. Some people, they get in their mind or say, I need to have my book edited, but they really don't know what that means. So we'll break it down. There's kind of, I guess you would say, 3 levels of editing. There's more, and I'm sure some editor somewhere will correct me in the comments. But for all intents and purposes, it really kind of comes down to really kind of 3 choices. The heaviest edit are developmental or substantive edits. What those are essentially are somebody working with you, going through your story, helping you flesh out your idea, pretty much like line by line, chapter by chapter, really helping you with the story. It's a really in-depth edit. It's also a really expensive edit. And typically I'd say probably not too many authors out there, at least on the independent circuit, actually do that. More often than not, you're going to see people go kind of alternate routes with that. So, for example, critique groups are one area. That's where you get a group with a bunch of other authors, and you really kind of tear apart each other's stories. Another option there are beta readers. Are any of these going to be as in-depth as developmental edit? Probably not. However, one, once again, if you're on a budget, and 2, what they will help you with is primarily what you're looking for with a developmental edit is you're looking to really shore up the weak points of your story. And both of those can help you do that. Once again, are they as in-depth? No, but are they going to help you find those those problem areas that hey, chapter 15 is boring, chapter 12 through chapter whatever doesn't make sense. Those are things that hopefully those two items, beta reading or a critique group can help kind of fill in the blanks for. Both are worthwhile. If you can afford a developmental edit, the multi-thousands of dollars it'll cost you, hey, that's great. But once again, it's kind of also probably the rarest edit. The lightest edit that you're going to find, and this is what most authors think about when they talk about editing, is just proofreading. Proofreading is really just going through your story and finding typos, grammatical errors, stuff like that. I'm not to say that proofreaders don't do a lot of work. Finding typos. It's one of those things you could you could reread your own manuscript doing self-editing 50 times and still miss a bunch. So it's definitely a very, very helpful item, but it's considered kind of the lightest form of editing. In the middle is copy editing or line editing, and this is kind of a bit of both. Typically, they're going through and looking for those grammatical issues and stuff. They're looking at your style, your tone. They probably are going to give you some some light story suggestions along the lines of hey, this section is boring, or hey, this makes no sense, cut it out. You've already said it. It's not nearly as in-depth, but it's a lot more in-depth than proofreading. So those are kind of the 3 that are out there. Typically, each of my books gets a proofread and a copy edit. Well, a copy edit first and then the proofread last. I work with Megan Harris to do my copy editing. Her and I have a really great accord there. You can go to my website and see the link to her site if you want. Highly recommended. And she kicks my ass up and down the block when it comes to when I send her a script, and then she just tears it apart. But it's a good tearing apart in that we go back and forth, and at the end of the day, the story comes out much stronger. And then before I release, I send my stories to typically to Beth at bzhercules.com, and she'll do the proofreading, and that's pretty much that. I mean, usually I'll give it one final once over myself before I release it to the public, just to make sure never hurts to have one extra bit of eyeballs. But that's typically a bit of my process. Now, finding and choosing an editor. Let's talk about that. it's not much different than finding and choosing a cover artist. You want somebody whose style you can work with, um, and that you can, and essentially you're partnering with them. So I mean, similar to like a cover artist is going to list samples on their site. Most editors, it's kind of hard to like list samples of stuff you edited, but what a lot of them will do is put out there and say, hey, send me 1,000 words, send me 1,500 words, send me a chapter, and I'll give you a sample edit. What that allow you to do is see if your style matches their style, and that's kind of an important area to to look into. Um, First of all, you want to make sure that they're going to edit your genre. Not everybody will edit every genre, especially if you write erotica. A lot of people would just say, hey, no, no thank you. Others are more than happy with that. So the first thing you want to do is, will they edit the stuff you write? What experience do they have there? Will they do a sample edit? When you get back that sample edit, have they did a good job? Have they butchered things? Or do they just not match what you're looking for? Or when you're done, you say, hey, actually, they found some good stuff. This might actually work. Things to take into consideration there. One bit of caution, and I've seen this happen occasionally, is in this business here, the same way anybody can write a book and call themselves an author, really, but anybody can say, hey, I'm an editor. Anybody who has a little bit of Photoshop experience can say, hey, I'm a cover designer. Doesn't make them a good cover designer. Doesn't make them a good editor. You should always feel that you're getting kind of like your money's worth with that. Typically most people have no problems listing their references, listing samples, listing who they've worked with, listing their rates up front. Get references, work with that stuff. I'm not saying that that you should never give somebody their first shot. Say somebody's coming out of college, they're a lit major, they want to go into this, they got to start somewhere. Chances are they're not going to start charging you top dollar. That might be an issue, but things to take into consideration. So one bit of caution I would say is editors are there to help. They're there to find issues, make suggestions. They're not there to rewrite your story. I've seen a couple folks where they've said, hey, I sent it off to the editor and it came back as a complete rewrite, completely changing my tone and such. Well, that's not what you're hiring them there for, because at the end of the day, it has to be your voice. If the story you're putting out there is not your voice, well, then that's going to hurt for subsequent stories. So that might be a case of somebody getting a little bit above and beyond what they should be doing. In which case, I might really consider either talking to that person or just not working with them again. It is a case in some cases where too much is not necessarily a good thing. So that's important. You want to make sure that an editor is respectful of your tone. Now, mind you, in some cases they might be rewriting all your stuff because quite possibly maybe your stuff stinks. That is something to take into consideration. Although quite frankly, a lot of editors, what they will do is once you send them your manuscript, they might take a look at it, and if they can't get through it, a chapter or two without their heads exploding, they might just send it back and say, no deal, you need to work on this some more. So a lot of professional editors will not just take your cash; they will actually make sure that your manuscript is up to a certain bit of snuff before they work with it. So, in some cases it might be them, in some cases it might be you. So always keep in mind what that is, especially if you send it to multiple editors. You send it to 5 editors, 4 of them say, this isn't ready for prime time, and one is just like, hey, I'll take your money, I don't care. That might be something where you step back and say, maybe I'm not getting a great edit, but also maybe my story is not ready. With regards to that, some editors will charge by the hour. Typically, I'm more comfortable with folks who are charging by the word, because you can have a quantifiable measurement going in there, knowing how much it's gonna run. I have heard of a couple horror stories of people getting burned, saying, okay, we think this will take X hours, and then it took X plus 100 hours, and they're like, well, pay us. If you're going to charge, if somebody is going to charge you by the hour, 1, get an estimate for what they want to charge you, and 2, put some rider in the contract that they're not allowed to go above X percentage without asking you first. That's just really just to cover your ass a bit. Because here's the thing, you don't want to go into an edit saying, okay, this is going to go in $500, and then they'll come back saying, oh, nope, sorry, it was $1,500. If you have that rider in the contract that protects you, where they say, too bad, so sad. Now, mind you, you probably also want to put in some protections where if there's probably, you want to get at least some kind of partial money back thing in there if the edit turns out to be so grossly out of whack. Like say I tell you, okay, it's going to be 500. And then I'm a third of the way through and I tell you, oops, sorry, it's 1500. I was wrong. Well, something at that point, I'm kind of trying, I'm almost holding your manuscript hostage for that final aspect. You really want a way to like protect yourself. Now, mind you, the protection goes both ways. Don't be a deadbeat. I mentioned this with cover artists. If you're doing something by the hour, or if you're doing by the word, you have a written contract of what you're paying. Well, guess what? As long as you're getting what you're supposed to be getting, don't disappear. A lot of people will will charge at various stages. Some will say, hey, pay me when it's done, but a lot will say, hey, pay me half up front or pay me a quarter up front, and we'll pay in quarters as we go through it. Figure that out ahead of time, agree to it, and stick to it. Don't disappear on people because once again, you become a deadbeat, you make really everybody else look bad. Let's see here. That's probably a pretty important thing, not being a poor client. I would say with regards to format and all of that, typically I'm not a big fan of handing somebody a manuscript and then handing it back to me in red pen printed out. Some people like that. I'm not a big fan of that. If you do like that, hey, that's great. I prefer to work with Microsoft Word and track changes. Just make sure that you agree what you're sending and what you're receiving ahead of time. Therefore, there's no confusion. Like I wouldn't want to send out something and say, okay, I'm going to get my Word manuscript back, and suddenly I get something in the mail that's like a shoebox full of papers that I have to go through. That would annoy me. But if you agree to it ahead of time, well, then everything is fine there. But that's my personal thing. I like Word and I like track changes. So that's kind of like, I guess really the gist of it. You want to work with somebody, and an editor is probably a partner most of all. They're going to be the closest to a partner because they have that skin in the game. They're there to make your story better. And, if they do a great job, you really want to stick with them. I mean, I've worked with Megan now 4 or 5 books. I probably have to count on my fingers, but I've worked with her for several books now, and I'm planning on continuing working with her because we make a really good partnership. I send her my stories. When all is said and done, when we go back and forth, the stories are better. Speaking of that partnership, I would also say, remember, it is exactly that. If somebody sends back a change to you, now if it's a typo change, I wouldn't be stupid and reject it. That's just idiotic. However, if somebody makes a suggestion and changes it, but you don't agree with it as the author, well, there's nothing that says you have to. Personally, when I get a suggestion back from Megan that I don't agree with, I typically take a look at it, step back, and say, okay, do I completely reject it? For example, maybe she's stepping on one of my jokes. Hey, it happens. I write horror comedy. Sometimes I put in really cheesy jokes, and I want those cheesy jokes in there. But hey, sometimes it's a scene, and sometimes I'll say, hey, this makes sense to get rid of it. Sometimes I'll say, no, I really like that scene, but she has a point that's too long, so I'll try to kind of meet her halfway. Remember that whole thing, partnership. That means, you don't necessarily have to agree with what they say. That being said, don't make it an ego fest and just reject everything they say. No, every part of my script is a masterpiece. Once again, that probably makes you a bit diluted and potentially a bad client. And quite frankly, if you're doing that, then either that editor's not right for you, or you're not right for that editor, in which case you should probably seek somebody else out for your next book. So those are kind of the main things. Find somebody that you feel you can partner with them. Get samples, get references, be a good client, pay your bills on time, all of that. Preferably give them credit in your book, on your website, all of that, especially if they're doing a really good job for you. And don't have any hesitation with referring them if such is the case. At the end of the day, what you want is somebody you can work with, you work well with, can meet your needs, respects you as a client, and you respect them as as a vendor, all of that. And the end goal is you put out a superior product. So that's pretty much it. Like I said, a lot of parallels to choosing a cover artist, but probably, possibly even more important from that partnership aspect. So that's about it on this subject. Once again, my name is Rick Gualtieri. This is Tales of a Midlist Author, and I can't wait to talk to you again next time. Thanks.